Hello, friends, colleagues, C++ learners, and students. In this video, I'm going to talk about C++ functions where you can pass default arguments to the functions. Hopefully, I'll do this in two parts. Part one is just description of basics. Part two, I'll show more examples. Once again, I'm Dr. Satish Singhal, PhD, Professor of Computer Information Technology at Rose State College in Midwest City, near Oklahoma City, Oklahoma. Okay. Reference to this topic in my ebook is in chapter 8 on functions, where the topic of function default argument is discussed. Current page number in the text are 49 to 53. And a link to ebook is below. You can pause the video and take a note of the link. I might embed that in the video also a little bit later. And that's the link to the ebook. I'll hold the video for a second, or you can pause it to get a copy of the link. It'll also be embedded somewhere here. Okay. So question is, what are the default arguments to the functions? Well, ordinarily, the number of arguments and data type of arguments passed to the function must map with the parameters in the function header. And the meaning of that is that if I'm passing 3 arguments, then when you call the function call should have 3 arguments, and data type of argument 1 should match the parameter 1, data type of argument 2 should match the parameter 2, and so on. So there's this mapping required. Okay, so we're showing you same thing with an example. Let's put that. So here's a function called print student. It takes 3 parameters. First parameter is string, and here we are showing just the header. And second parameter the age of the student, and third parameter the GPA. So when a function print student with header below is called, the first call argument must be a string value. So when I actually call the print student, this should be a name, and second should be a int value, presumably an age, and third should be a double value, presumably a GPA. So all 3 arguments should be provided, otherwise you will get a compile error. That's the mapping mechanism between function prototype header and the function call. In the ebook we do talk about this congruency between the 3 right after the function default parameters. Okay. What if at many times when a function is to be called, the value of 1 or more parameters for the many function call we are going to make is same? Okay, example of that, we'll repeat that again, is let's say GPA. Students who are freshmen in the first semester, their GPA will be 0, and there will be a lot of them. So in that case, coding labor is cut down if function is called, the value of 1 or more parameters is assumed without inputting them, this is THEM, spelling error, in the function call. Okay? For example, let us take a look at the print student again. This is our print student. First parameter is name of the student, second is the age, third is the GPA. And as we said, all the freshmen in the first semester will have 0.0 GPA because they have not taken any classes yet in the beginning. Okay, and we repeat the same thing here. Thus, it is laborious to print their data and make a function call as below for each of the freshmen in the first semester. See, the 0.0 will be passed for all the freshmen, as many calls as we have to make. And I understand that you can cut down the labor by using a loop, but this is the default value. And let's say you're making these calls in different parts of the program, so you're actually not able to make them at once, then you can use the loop. Okay. Last parameter is same for every freshman in the first semester. Okay. Would it not be labor saving that all the freshmen in the first semester we can call print student function? For all the freshmen in the first semester, we can call print student function with the following type of syntax. Well, since GPA is going to be 0 for all of them, can we use just this? Name and the age only, and just leave out the GPA because for all of them it's the same value. So can third parameter GPA is automatically assumed to be 0.0, and can it be filled out for us automatically? Well, as it just so happens that C++ technology of passing default arguments allows us to do exactly that we can leave out the GP argument and it will be provided default value 0.0. Okay, so we can use the technology of default argument and give GP a default value. That doesn't mean you cannot pass an explicit value. Sure, you can. Function will still work if you have comma actual GPA for somebody who is not a freshman first semester. Default value is just an extra mechanism. There are other reasons for providing default arguments, and those are filling out some data value for arguments because data was not available at the time of function call. Well, all the data are not available all the time. So when you call the function, something has to be filled out, and that value that you can live with filling out can be assumed to be a default value for the time being until real data are provided. And you need to understand that happens more often than you can imagine. People are filling out a form and they just didn't fill out certain fields. That's the data that's not there. Databases have a technology called putting a null value in the database tables. They put a null value, and that's the value that is not known at that time. Okay, so similar attempt can be made here. For example, if a student forgot to fill out their age in the admission form, then we can pass a default value for age as 0, indicating that age was not provided. Instead of 0 in databases, they put null, which is a better system, not available to us in the programming languages, except some special situations. So we'll go to Xcode now and code the function print student and show other rules for default arguments. Actually, we'll come back to the PowerPoint and show the rules and then implement the rules again in Xcode. So let's get out of the PowerPoint, go to Xcode. So here I have the, okay, first of all, let's just take out the default arguments and just see how the function works as is. So this is the function definition here. This is the function prototype. This is the normal thing, no default arguments for anything. All right. So function print student take 3 arguments, the name, age, and GPA. And what function does, it prints out the name as is, but if age is 0, which will be passed from the main function if student forgot to provide the age, then we print out that student has not provided their age yet. Otherwise, we print the age. Now, if a student is a freshman in the first semester, the GPA will be 0, and in that case, we write down that GPA is 0.0 because student is a freshman with first semester. Otherwise, we print the GPA. That's the function definition. So if I call the function right now, I'll have to call it like this. Print student name. I have defined the name, and let's say Lisa Adam was age 25. I'll define that, and the GPA is, let's say, 3.4. I'll put that in there, and let's see. Oh, okay, my name is lowercase. Okay, fine. So let's run this program, and obviously it'll print out the name, age, and GPA. So maximize that, and okay, somehow print student. I call only printed the name, didn't print the other. Oh, okay. Yeah, I think that was the older output. So now I printed everything. So it printed the name, age, and GPA, all 3. Okay. But let's say we wanted to implement that case that a lot of freshmen are first semester. So for that, I don't really want to make function call like this. So I just want to do this in a way that GPA is set to 0 automatically. All right. So in functional name overloading, what C++ allows you to do, this is the extreme right argument, I can define a default value 0.0 here. And in that case, Lisa Adams' data will not be compromised. I'll still get this output. But let's say some student, so data for student Jim Jones, who is freshman first semester. Well, in that case, I have their age and their name. So I can call the print student like this. Jim Jones, and age is, let's say, 26. So first thing you notice that contrast this with this one when we provided default value for GPA. So notice this is no longer a compile error. If I remove the default value, there's incongruency in that function call here. Now I get this compile error, no matching function call to print student. But if I put a default value here, oops, the compiler will disappear, because compiler or program will take this to be the value of the third parameter that I didn't specify here. And now let's print the data for Jim Jones. And the technique we'll be using, we'll always look at for the last modification. Okay, we'll look at the last lines of print, because first print is coming from here, so we'll really look at this one. So let's run the program again, and notice the last print out. It gives me name correctly, age 26, so I get the age 26. But notice there was no value for the GPA specified in the function call, so a default value is taken, and it prints GPA 0.0 because student is a freshman with first semester. So even though GPA value was not passed in the function call, it's just taken off from here, and this piece of code executes. Okay, and we get GPA 0.0 because student is a freshman with first semester. Okay, so in this function call, all arguments have explicit value. In this function call, the GPA has the default value, but name and age have the explicit value. Okay. Well, we want to go one more step here, and we say, okay, let's say some student forgot to put their age. So how do we print their data? How do we actually tell the system that they forgot to put their age? So rather than explicitly passing a 0 value for age, which seems a little funny, I will put the default argument for age, let's say 0. So in that case, let's print student such as data for a student Tim Mathis, who is freshman first semester and forgot to give their age. Well, in that case, I can make a function call like this one here. Just give one argument, Tim Mathis. Okay. Notice this function call compiles because I gave a default argument for age 0. If I take that out, it's not going to work. See? Now we get the compile error. No matching function call. Okay. All right. So now this will compile, and let's run our program again. And once again, let's look at the last piece of data. So that's our last piece. Name is Tim Mathis. So that was passed as an explicit argument, but it took the default value for the age, and we print out student has not provided their age yet, and default value 0 for the GPA because student is a freshman with first semester. So it took the default value for the age and the default value for the GPA. Okay, and in that case, the print student function executes this part and this part because explicit value has not been provided. So once you provide default argument, in this case, so call all the 3 arguments are explicit. GPA is default, name and age are explicit, age and GPA are default, name is explicit. Okay, that's one advantage of functions taking default arguments. Okay, now I'm going to go back and tell you some rules about the default arguments and come back and illustrate those rules. In a way, we have kind of shown that already, but we'll come back again and do it one more time. So back to the PowerPoint. There are two key rules about default arguments. Let's understand the indexing of arguments from left to right. So if we index arguments from left to right in the function call, and indexing starts with 0, just remember this rule in computer science. We're always going to say that our index will always start with 0, not with 1. Counting starts with 1, but indexing starts with 0. So understand the difference between counting and indexing. So first argument has index 0. Second argument is index of 1. Third argument has index of 2. And so on. So this is the indexing system that I'm going to use. So this is the rule 1. If default value is provided to the argument with index n, then all arguments with index greater than n also must have default value. Okay? So we can go to Xcode and show you that. So here index 0 does not have a default value, but index 1 does. So index 2 should have default value also. Alright. In fact, if I remove the default value here, that would be a compile error. So all of a sudden I get compile error here. It says missing default argument on parameter GPA, and of course here and here. So red flags are everywhere if I don't follow that rule. This function has 3 arguments: index 0, index 1, index 2. I gave default argument to the argument with index 1. Well, index 2 should have default argument as well, otherwise it's a compile error. And as soon as I put 0.0 here, my compile error disappears. So that's the rule number 1, that if default value is provided to the argument with index n, then all arguments with index greater than n also should have default value. There is a rule number 2. Default arguments are only written in function prototype if you use the prototype, of course. If you use the prototype, then they are skipped when function definition is written. As I said, this applies when you use the prototype. And we show that how this rule has to be obeyed. A lot of students just copy and paste the prototype and use that as a header. That's not going to work in this case, because let me copy that. All of a sudden I have this red flag. It says redefinition of function argument. So prototype have to be skipped the default arguments have to be skipped if you use prototype. You can't really have them in the header here. But, and something, what I'm saying it's not going to be really, it's not applied very often, that if you don't use prototype, if you move the whole function definition here, really meaning that I comment out this one, I move my main and x after the print student and then give default argument. Well, that will work, okay? So this will compile and run, not a problem. Build succeeded, we'll get the same result. But of course, I want to caution you that we never really use the system of not using prototype. So even though this will work, the professional advice is not to use functions without prototypes. So I'm just going to revert back. So let's see. Okay. I guess I can do Command Z real quick. Yeah, there you go. So we're back to the normal. Okay, so you could do this, that function and its header and definitions before main, and then you have the prototypes in the header, but really default arguments in the header, but really we don't use that system. So we have to use this system. And then in that case, the header line does not have prototype, the default value, prototype does. Okay, so that's the second rule. Okay. Okay, we showed you that. Now we want to show you ignore function example in C++, and we show that in the ebook. Okay, so let's go to the ebook, because we have done this work already. So we can use that. Okay, here it is, that the stream function ignore has this prototype. iStream, return by reference, name of the function ignore. Then it takes two parameters, both have default value. Stream size is really number of characters that you want to ignore. The variable name is n, and there's a default value called 1 provided. And second is a delimiter, which has default value of EOF parameter, end of file parameter value. And don't be confused by int. It's really a character. EOF is a character, but character has a internal integer value. So if we say int data type here, that doesn't really limit anything. When I actually make a function call, I can pass a character there. Its ASCII value will be taken and everything will be okay. So here, if default values are not taken, then n is the maximum number of characters to ignore. Delim is a delimiter provided. So function ignore is coded to ignore n characters or up to delimiter character, okay? And this, the comment here says characters for argument delim are actually represented by their ASCII value. This is why delim has an int data type. Okay? And the way function definition is written, that ignore is coded to ignore up to n characters or up to delimiter character, whichever comes first, whichever of the two comes first. And since both parameters have default value, there are 4 possible calls to ignore, and we show their effects, those 4 calls. Okay. Right here. If I make, okay, I'm sorry, I'm in the wrong place really. Should go here. There you go. If I just say scene.ignore, assuming that we are working with the keyboard data entry, so if user did not enter EOF by pressing Control C as the first character, then program will ignore just 1 character from this input stream. So whatever the input buffer, it'll just ignore 1 character. But so in that case, both parameters for ignore are taking default value. 1 character or this, whichever comes first. Okay. But if I make a call like ignore 5, then it will ignore 5 characters or character up to EOF, whichever comes first. Okay. If you type 4 characters and then press Control C simulates the EOF, well, it's gonna ignore up to EOF because there were not 5 characters. But if you type 10 characters and then do Control C, well, then it will ignore 5 characters and leave all the characters after that in the stream. And here I give 2 explicit arguments, both of them, 10 and end of the line character. So it'll ignore either first 10 characters or up to end of line, whichever comes first. And here's another variation on the theme here. Again, here 2 explicit value also. Ignore up to 8 characters or character B in the inputs buffer, whichever comes first. So since both arguments in the ignore function had default value, 3 different types of function calls are possible. If I give no parameters, then default value is taken for both parameters. When I give 1 parameters, then value for the first parameter is explicit, second one is the default. So for example, if I input less than 5 characters, then EOF is the second character, will ignore up to EOF. So that value is the default value. And here I pass the explicit value for both parameters. Okay. So this is discussion of functions taking default argument with some basic examples. Okay. In the part 2, I'm ending here. I'm going to show a few more examples of passing parameter by default. There are lots of examples there. I'm not saying example I'm going to show are unique, but we'll take a look at them. So thank you and see you soon. Bye.